it's long awaited. And I think the findings, especially from the community listening sessions, definitely indicate that as well. So without further ado, I'm presenting the summary of findings for the community listening sessions. The community listening sessions were one of 3 primary research methodologies that we employed throughout this year-long process in order to compile the widest extent and greatest depth of insights and perspectives. And the community listening sessions really helped kind of provide more of a in-depth just understanding of what Black Americans are going through, and just Black people as a whole who reside within this country. So, research guided questions. Essentially, through the listening sessions that were hosted throughout the state of California, they were primarily taken on by the anchor organizations that we collaborate with. And there were a set of specific research questions that were specifically developed so that way they can essentially garner the greatest insights relative to those 4 main areas that we aim to evaluate throughout our research and research report. So essentially, 3 of those guiding questions are: what is our vision for the future of Black California? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? The second question being, in order to repair harm, you have to acknowledge harm. And if you had to express one of the 3 harms experienced throughout your day-to-day life, what would you specifically express, as well as what are 1 to 3 resolutions, right, that would be most beneficial, right, to combat those harms? Thirdly, take your time, it's okay. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, so thirdly, the question that we widely ask within these community listening sessions is, as we think about some of these harms that were discussed throughout the dialogues and conversations that were had throughout these sessions, we're trying to understand what are the best routes to help people heal and prosper within the state of California. So these were essentially what the listening sessions inquired from the public. So our timeline for the community listening sessions. Essentially, the community listening sessions were hosted from January of this year all the way through August, so roughly 8 months. And these sessions were, again, as I mentioned before, hosted by the anchor organizations. And so these organizations were housed across the state of California, from the Bay Area to Los Angeles to the Inland Empire. And so these sessions were hosted primarily within the communities of Black Californians throughout the state. So we really wanted a wide extent of insights and perspectives from, again, Black Californians who just reside throughout the state. Secondly, the analysis. So after the anchor organizations, in collaboration, of course, with Mary Lee, Ama Neemaki, who did tremendous just work with helping organize and helping just coordinate the entire efforts. We ensured that those sessions were recorded, so we have recordings of the conversations being had, right? And what we did was we took those recordings, we uploaded them to transcription services, so that way we would have the written, just conversations just outlined for us, and then from there we aim to analyze those findings. Thirdly, we ended up, reading through these transcriptions. We really wanted to, again, analyze the widest extent of just emergent findings, especially relative to those 4 categories that we're aiming to investigate, right? So harms, resolutions, eligibility, and extent of support for reparations. And what you'll find, especially as we describe more so our process as well as the findings themselves, is that we were really able to extract, again, a lot of insights, and this is all going to be detailed within our report that is due to come out soon. So, community listening session structure. So essentially, there were 17 official community listening sessions. They took place, again, throughout the state of California. However, there was a bit of a subset that were hosted via Zoom. And so, let's see. So, yes, our analysis. So, our analysis process, again, was inductive and deductive process. And again, we really aim to, through those 4 categories that we're aiming to acquire insights for and derive answers for, we were able to extract a wide range of themes. I mean, we're gonna go into quite a bit of them, but so far, I mean, there's roughly around 32 themes just that we've identified. And in terms of reliability and validity, we engaged in peer review as well as just a continual debriefing process, right? About how we're understanding what we're finding in the research, as well as how we're choosing to basically analyze and code the themes. So, organizational findings, again, as mentioned, we're analyzing types of harm, extensive support, resolutions, eligibility, and another category that was added later was just significant trends. And so this category is anything emerging outside of the scope of our initial just project guidelines. So here we go, the meat of the project, right? We have the harms experienced. So as you find here, you see roughly, all of these categories of harm that were explicitly conveyed throughout the community listening sessions. And we actually have frequency shown down there at the bottom of the graph. And as you can see, again, these are the 5 most pervasive harms that were noted throughout the listening sessions. So, educational opportunity, economic disenfranchisement, as you hopefully can see here. And then there's other harms as well that didn't necessarily come up as often, however, were significant enough to know and to definitely detail and highlight more, which again, we plan to do within the report. We have, again, food inaccessibility, so people, specifically detailing residing in food deserts, right? We have neighborhood and urban disinvestment, which, there are certain stories of people that relate the fact that neighborhoods that they grew up in, they still reside in, don't look the same, and specifically there being less resources and opportunity there, just in general. So these are some things that we're gonna definitely explore. So I hope to go in depth on a few of these. I know we have a time constraint.
One moment, I want to inform my colleagues that Noelle sent over this PowerPoint presentation to our emails in case we're having a little trouble seeing that from the screen. You can proceed. Thank you.
Got you. No, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marie Gonzalez, for telling folks.
Okay, great. So, again, the most profound finding we had within the category of harms was actually educational and opportunity. And so it was actually this harm specifically that was quite prevalent. I mean, one thing I can say is within each of the listening sessions, it was at least noted at least 3 times within each one. So it was something that came up quite frequently, and the discussions had around it were pretty profound. And you'll see that again with block quotes from the transcripts that we embedded into the report. Essentially, the subcategories, sub-themes that emerged from educational and opportunity were the lack of Black instructors in the classroom, right? And so there was conversation around how this specifically relates to the experiences of Black children within the classroom, right? Their connectedness to learning, and specifically, their connectedness to learning as well as their experiences in the classroom, right? Here are some of the other sub-themes that were identified which underpin this broader scope of educational and opportunity. So, block quote here. Yeah, so another, again, major finding relative to the harms experienced by Black Californians is actually economic disenfranchisement. And so with economic disenfranchisement, what really is central to this thing specifically is the fact that Black Californians widely conveyed experiences relative to just a quality of life that is remnant on having less financial means than their white non-Black counterparts. So again, that's represented here. What specifically came up quite frequently was, wage gaps. So we have the lack of comparable payment for forced labor outputs, in addition to lack of financial safety nets, in addition to just other areas which really underpin, just underscore just the quality of life as well as the experiences that Black Californians are able to have. So we're short on time, but again, another category here, discriminatory policing and criminality, it's something that is more discussed, of course. However, these findings really depict an image that is quite frankly important for just state reps and people in law enforcement, just the wider scope of the community to know and understand. So again, another central category that we were tasked with investigating was the lack of, the level of support for reparations. Here we have two blog quotes again, which kind of show you just differing levels of support for the initiative. And so we have quite a bit of varying responses relative to that. Again, then we have reparations-based resolution. So again, this is really getting at the question of what's going to serve as most beneficial for Black Californians, right? What types of opportunities, what types of supports, what type of just investments is truly gonna serve as a catalyst to bolster them as a community and also just increase their life prospects. So what we find here, again, financial compensation was most frequently noted, as well as community investments, educational opportunities, and so on. So for financial compensation opportunities, what's interesting is there was quite frequent reference of cash payments as a form of reparations that would be useful and beneficial, in addition to other forms of financial relief, right? So tax relief, receiving tax credits and deductions for, specifically for, homes and for property. Property was actually a pretty huge thing that came up, land ownership and property. And so again, as you kind of see, some of these things are kind of, they connect to one another and they're somewhat influenced by one another. If you don't own or possess property or a home, right, you have home ownership, then you're more than likely susceptible to, being housing insecure, not being able to provide stable living conditions for not just yourself, but for your family, and that cycle just trickles down. So we see that as well. Again, we have investments from sustaining Black community spaces. And so in a way, it almost reminded me of Dr. Brown, what you mentioned about, really just the faith-based community and like that, being an integral part of the Black experience in America. This theme really speaks to essentially just the importance of investing into Black community spaces that really help us just seek refuge within our community. So, let me see. Again, the blog quotes for resolutions as well. Employee you all to read them since you have a copy. Eligibility, again, this is the most common perspectives that emerge from the question of eligibility. And anytime reparations is mentioned, that's a commonly heard question that emerges. And so, again, we just felt like it would be very just insightful to just understand and just as it came up naturally to just capture and document what Black Californians specifically are saying relative to that. So significant trends, there were quite a few trends that fell outside of those four predominant categories that emerged. We have acknowledgement of Black community exploitation, right? So people specifically, referencing a sort of demand for a public apology, a demand for acknowledgement. We also have, a few others here, as you can see. So I'm gonna hand it off.
We'll turn over now to our analysis of personal testimony, and that will be presented by Chi Nguyen.